Hi everyone, I'm Dilshan. I'm a senior software engineer working at Synergen Health, specializing in the front-end space. Today I'm going to speak about a relatively new technology called web components and how web components can be used to implement complex ideas. In the beginning, I will define what web components are, tell you the advantages and challenges of using web components, and finally, I'll implement a web component using a library called Angular Elements. So, web components have quietly started powering more of the web than you may be aware of. Everyone is using web components whether you know it or not. First, we can look at the current state of web components adoption in the real world, and later we can see how what the use cases are if you consider web components. So, a web component can be defined as a set of web platform APIs that allow you to create new, custom, reusable, encapsulated HTML tags to use in web pages and web applications. These custom components and widgets built on the web component standards will work across modern browsers and can be used with any JavaScript library framework or without any JavaScript library or framework. 5 to 8% of all web loads today use one or more web components. This is a statistic given by Google. You can see in the graph from 2015 to 2019 there was a huge spike in the use of web components. This is a huge amount given that it's a relatively new technology. This makes web components one of the most successful new browser features, statistically speaking. It's used by big web applications like YouTube or GitHub. So what are web components? In modern web, pretty much everyone uses components to encapsulate UI functionality. Web components allow us to extend the browser with new capabilities like an image carousel that can be expressed as normal HTML as if it was part of the platform. Web components are low-level browser API that gives us a standard interface for defining new components. They have a common way of being created using HTML and standard DOM API that every framework uses, and a common way of receiving and sending using properties and events. As you can see in the screen, this is a small example of an image carousel using a web component. Web components are not one specific framework like Angular or React. They don't set out to replace frameworks either. When it comes to the advantages and challenges, one advantage is reusability. A web component can be used in multiple applications. It provides interoperability between frameworks. This makes it reusable. Maintainability. A web component has a template that can be used to put entire markup separately when it comes to maintenance. Platform independence. As web components are developed using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it can run on different browsers. This makes it platform independent. This also allows no vendor locking. Shadow DOM provides encapsulation mechanism to style, script, and HTML markup. This encapsulation mechanism provides private scope and prevents the content of the component being affected by external documents. Web components are also independently deployable. When it comes to challenges, the main challenge is it's a new technology. The W3C web component specification is very new to the browser technology and not completely implemented by the browsers. Shared resource. A web component has its own scoped resources. There may be cases where some of the resources being between the components are common. Performance. Increase in the number of web components takes more time to get used inside the DOM. SEO is also not really good because it uses a lot of JavaScript. When it comes to the implementation, I can easily implement a web component using vanilla JavaScript. I'll say custom elements.define and give the component name and pass the component functionality. And the tag can be used in any HTML page that you have. So when it comes to communication with the web component, we use properties and events. So if I want to send a property called site navigation is open, I can say site nav state equals true. And if I want to receive an event emitted from within the web component, I can use events. If I want to grab an event emitted by the web component, I can reference my component by adding it to a constant and adding an event listener. So whenever an event is fired, I get a console log. So what are the use cases? Upgrading legacy apps. Let's say you have an old jQuery project and you have to implement a somewhat relatively complex form which you don't want to rewrite when you are upgrading this application. You can write this form as a web component and use it in the legacy application. And even after upgrading, you can still use this form without any changes. Write once, run anywhere. Since web components are platform agnostic, you can write this once, let's say a date picker, and use it in your Angular or React application. Micro frontends. Web components are the main technology which enables us to implement the idea of micro frontends. Implementing style guides. Going back to the example of the date picker, you can have a similar look and feel across different platforms since you will be reusing the same component. Even though web components can be written using vanilla JavaScript, there are some libraries to make it even more easier to create. Some examples include the Polymer project, which was developed by Google, and Stencil.js, and finally Angular Elements, which was also written by Google to help Angular applications adopt web components. To demonstrate creating a web component, I will use Angular Elements. What I want to do is add an Angular form to a static web page written using some jQuery plugins. So this is my web page. As you can see, I have used some plugins. So this is the web page. What I want is when someone clicks the Hire Me button, I want a pop-up to come which will take the user's email and the description. So there are two ways for me to do this. I can either take all of this into an Angular project, or I can create only this part using Angular elements. So I think the next way is much easier and less messy. To store the user's data, I will use Firebase. I'll call the project Hire Me button. While this is getting created, I'll also create the Angular project. So I open terminal. So I can use my Angular CLI to create a new Angular project. So I'll call this Hire Me button. So I'm going to create this project in my desktop. I'm saying I don't need routes, and I'll use SCSS for styling, and this will take a while for all the dependencies to download. And while that is going on, this Firebase project is created. What I have to do is go and get my API keys. copy this, you'll be needing it later. So looks like it's downloaded. Now I can open this with my IDE. So this is the Jaime static page. I want to open the Angular project which I created right now. So I'll go to the desktop, find the project and open it. I'll open it with a new window because I want to keep this as well. As you can see, all the new project files are there, and I'll run this to show you how it looks like. This will open on localhost 4200 port. So what I want to do is turn this web application into a pop-up which is also a web component. Now I can store the Firebase API keys which I got from Firebase. Paste it like this. Also make sure to put it in the prod file. After this, I'll have to install some of the dependencies. Open a command prompt instance and let's add Angular material. Angular material is added for styling and for some of the components like the dialog component. Choose the default theme. Give yes to material typography. Yes to animations. And it's installing all the packages. Now it's done installing the packages. Now let's install Angular Elements. This is the library which allows us to create web components using Angular. Finally, let's add the Firebase library. Angularfy is finished installing, so I'll go to my app module, inject some of the modules. I'll be needing this and mat button module and reactive forms module because I'll be creating a form, an Angular file module dot initialize app. Now I have to refer to the environment variables that I gave before. Firebase config. Finally, I have to inject Angular file store module. I have injected most of the modules. Now I have to clean up some of this code. I erased everything in app component. I won't be needing both of these files, so I can delete it. And actually I don't need this template as well, so I'll delete that also. And go into my app component.ts. I don't need that. And without directly referring to a URL, I'll write the template here itself. I need a button here. I need a click event with open define this function, and I also need to style this. So what this button is, this is the same button that I'm creating. When I click this button, I want the pop-up to come. So I'll have to use the same classes that were written here. So let's see what those classes are. I'll copy these classes and put it here. So even though this application doesn't know what these classes are, when I put this web component over to that other application, it knows how to style this. Let's give the button text as hire me, same as what is written here. And let's give the functionality of this button. I need to pass a component here which I haven't created yet, so I'll be doing that in a while. Give a width, I'll say 400 pixels. And this is what happens when the pop-up is closed. For now, if there is any data, I'll just console log it. Now I need to create the component, the pop-up model, actual model. So I'll say ng generate component, hire me model. So you can see this is created. I'll give this component name over here. Now let's see whether this pop-up works. Yeah, it's working fine. Now I need to add the email and description. I won't be having enough time in order to do all of that, so I'll be copying some of the implementation code. So this is basically a form which has the email and description. So I'll go to my hire me model component and paste it here. Also need to add service file. So now that error disappeared. It looks like I've forgotten to add one module, so let's add it quickly. Now let's see whether the application works. Yes. So I'm getting an email and a description. So what is happening here is I define the form first, and then if the information is valid, so I call this service. Within this I call the file store and add whatever the user inputs into this request collection. Now back in Firebase Firestore, let's see whether the application will accept inputs. So I have to create a database. Let's go to the rules. I will remove this for now. So this means anyone can read or write from the database. Obviously you don't want to do production with something like this, but this is just for testing. Now let's go back to our database and see. So we don't have a collection. Let's see whether our application works. So it seems like the collection is working and we are actually passing data from our application into this. And now we come to the most important part of this tutorial, turning this application into a web component. So in order to do that, I come back to my app module. I enter entry components as hire me model component and app component. What this means is this will be loaded dynamically, and then I need to put this code here. So injector comes from Angular core, and a create custom element comes from Angular elements, what the library we downloaded before. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a custom element like I told in the theory part, and I'm seeing whether there is an element already called hire button. If it's not there, I define one and give the element as app component. And here later I have to override the default bootstrap method of Angular. Don't forget to comment out the default bootstrap method. I save it, and now what I have to do is create a custom build configuration. So for this, right after the build step, I have a custom build configuration. So what this does is it builds the application in production mode and without any output hashing, and it runs this node.js file which I have to create. So I'll do that right now. New file. What this file will do is when the application is built, it will concatenate all the necessary files into one JS file and also one CSS file. So we don't have to import more than what we actually need in the other application. So this is the file. These are the three JS files that I'll be concatenating. It will be within this path. I also need to install these two dev dependencies. This is for concatenation. Both are installed successfully, so I'll go and check it. Yeah, both are there. Now let's try running the build script. Okay, we can see that the two files were generated. These three files were concatenated into this file and also the CSS file. We are done creating the web component, so now let's use it. I go into my other project and I paste it here. The CSS file I move into the CSS folder. And I go into my index file. I reference the CSS file. Now all I have to do is reference the JavaScript file. And at last, let's refer to the component. So this is the hire me link. I can erase that. Now, remember the component name we gave here, over here. So let's call that. And save it. Now let's run this file. So this is finally working. Let's send this data. And there you have it. I showed you how to create a web component using Angular elements, where it will be able to run on any JavaScript environment, regardless of the framework or library used. I think this is a way to push the web forward using reusable components. Hope you enjoyed the video and learned something.